While I buried my sister, my son's wife changed the locks on my home. He didn't stop her. He handed her the keys. Then they emptied my closet and used my card to decorate their new start. I was the one who paid for the couch she sat on to call herself owner. They thought I'd disappear quietly. Instead, I turned their fraud into a felony and wrote their names out of everything that matters. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. I buried my sister and came home to be erased. The sun hadn't even set yet when Evelyn turned onto the cracked driveway of the house she'd shared for 42 years. Her sister's ashes were still warm in the urn on the passenger seat. The funeral had been small, just a few voices in a chapel too big for its grief, and Evelyn had driven through the night, silence draped over her like a second skin. Her fingers ached from gripping the steering wheel. Her black wool dress clung to her back with the sweat of mourning. All she wanted now was a hot shower, one glass of Merlot, and the sound of her own footsteps on wood floors that remembered her. But the key wouldn't turn. She frowned, tried again. A slight jiggle, a twist. Nothing. Evelyn stepped back, confusion quickly giving way to unease. That's when she noticed the square of paper taped neatly to the inside of the glass pane. She leaned in, squinting. The house feels lighter now. We've updated things while you were gone. The handwriting was soft and bubbly. Tessa's, complete with a little smiley face drawn at the end like punctuation to a slap. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment, unsure what part of her body to trust, the pounding in her chest or the ringing in her ears. Her mouth went dry. The porch light flickered on behind the blinds, triggered by motion. But the house remained still. No one opened the door, no voices, no footsteps. She knocked, twice, waited, knocked harder. Nothing. The air was suddenly too thick to breathe. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob again, twisting, jamming the key as if willing it back to when it had worked, when it had been hers. A neighbor's dog barked. Somewhere, a lawn sprinkler hissed. Evelyn backed away from the door, slowly, as if exiting a crime scene she hadn't meant to walk into. The weight of her sister's death twisted in her chest with something else. Older, colder. She didn't cry. Not then. She just got in the car and drove. The motel off Route 17 still had the same peeling sign from when Michael used to take her there for weekend getaways before they had Eric. The clerk didn't ask questions when she handed over her ID with a shaky hand. Room 3. A smelled faintly of bleach and cigarettes. The carpet had seen better centuries. She didn't care. She locked the door, double-bolted it, then sat on the edge of the bed like someone had asked her to wait. Only no one was coming. The urn sat silently in the corner, wrapped in a seatbelt from the drive. Evelyn didn't unpack. Instead, she reached for the worn leather folio in her funeral bag, her just-in-case file, the one Michael had insisted they prepare when he first got sick. It had traveled with her to the hospital, to the lawyer's office, and now, apparently, to exile. She opened it with the kind of reverence you reserve for old photo albums or court evidence. Her eyes scanned past medical proxies and insurance pages until she found the one she needed. Langford property deed. Joint ownership. Michael R. Langford and Evelyn M. Langford. Her hands stopped shaking. Her breath returned in low, clipped inhales. A memory surfaced. Michael, sitting in his recliner after a chemo session, insisting, "Don't you let anyone confuse kindness with surrender." She folded the document shut, set it on the desk, and pulled out her phone. There was only one number she needed. Renee Collins answered on the second ring, her voice warm and clipped with late-hour professionalism. "Renee," Evelyn said, voice steadying. "How fast can you make a house heavier?" Evelyn calls the attorney who handled her late husband's estate. "How fast can you make a house heavier?" She thought presence gave her ownership. She didn't check the papers. The scent of bergamot and old paper filled the law office like a memory someone forgot to file away. Evelyn sat across from Renee Collins, hands folded in her lap, the weight of her purse like an anchor beside her. Her funeral dress was still stiff with road-wrinkled fabric, and her shoes left damp crescents on the polished hardwood floor from morning dew. Renee pushed her glasses up with one finger and looked over the document Evelyn had brought, nodding with practiced calm. Evelyn, she said, voice low and clear, you're still on the title. Nothing's changed. Legally, the house is yours. The words should have brought comfort. Instead, they hit like the first step into an icy river. Evelyn didn't smile. Then why did it feel like I was trespassing? Renee sighed, tapping the corner of the paper. Because people like your daughter-in-law mistake comfort for entitlement, but that doesn't rewrite deeds. The air conditioner hummed softly overhead. Evelyn glanced down at her lap, where her fingers clutched each other like they might break. Tessa moved in after Michael passed, said it would be just for a while, to help Eric settle. I didn't argue. I didn't want to argue, but little by little, she started cutting my name out of my own house. Renee leaned forward, silent encouragement in her posture. I'd come downstairs and find my quilts boxed up, replaced with cream throws she called less depressing, my grandfather clock, gone to storage, and when friends visited, she'd correct them. It's actually my husband's family's home now. Like I was a house guest, an extra. The memory made Evelyn's jaw tighten. She painted over the kitchen I designed, took down the photos of Michael and me, but I said nothing. Because grief makes you polite, it tells you silence is softer than confrontation. Renee looked at her, still and composed. And now? Now I know silence costs, and I've paid enough. Renee nodded, her expression sharpening. There's a move we can make. Not many use it anymore, but it's clean and effective. A restrictive covenant. It's like wrapping the house in legal steel wool. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning we file a deed restriction that outlines who may reside, under what terms, and what authority they don't have. It's enforceable. She won't be able to change light bulbs without your permission, let alone locks. Evelyn sat back, spine straightening like she was uncoiling. Let's do it. Let's make this house harder to lift than she'll ever carry. Renee gave a brief smile. I'll prepare the documents today. It won't undo what she's done, but it'll stop her from doing more. Outside, the sky had turned a muted gray, the kind that made every building look sharper, sadder. Evelyn walked back to her car slowly, as if her shoes were still processing the weight of the decision. Her phone buzzed before she even opened the door. A new email. Subject, notification of informal occupancy filing. Sender, County Clerk's Office. Evelyn tapped it open with a slow, practiced thumb. Tessa Langford has submitted a request for recognition as an informal tenant in residence at 64 Bent Willow Lane, pending review. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Just the rustle of wind through early autumn leaves. Behind her, a group of pigeons scattered off the law office steps, startled by nothing. Evelyn receives a notification. Tessa filed for informal tenant occupancy status behind her back. She lived rent-free and emotionally tax-free, but now the IRS would see her. The sound of the motel fridge kicking on startled Evelyn from sleep. She sat up slowly, heart hammering, drenched in sweat despite the freezing air. The clock read 4:11 a.m. Her body still hadn't figured out what rest meant. On the nightstand, the urn sat in shadow, quiet, unmoving. Her sister had died softly. Tessa was killing her in increments. Evelyn slipped out of bed, flipped open her laptop, and began typing like a woman looking for something sharp in a drawer full of dull things. She started with Tessa's social media. Instagram was full of curated serenity, white kitchens, crystals on windowsills, filtered sunlight. One post from a few weeks ago stopped her cold. Another late night of spreadsheets and HVAC calls, Joshua property manager life, Joshua home boss. She stared at the caption, then the hashtags. Then the comments, one in particular. You should totally write off the utilities if you're managing it alone now. Evelyn's breath slowed. She opened another tab, logging into a free public tax filing lookup tool. The property's parcel number led her to the assessor's record. No name change, but under recent activity, something else flickered to life. Claimant, Tessa Langford. Status, pending, IRS audit. Property Management Declaration. Evelyn blinked. She clicked twice to confirm it wasn't a cached error. Tessa had claimed herself as a manager of Evelyn's property. That meant potential deductions, utilities, maintenance, maybe even groceries. She pulled out her phone and snapped photos of the post, the IRS record, and the assessor's page. Then she forwarded them to Renee with a single-line subject: fraud potential. Call me ASAP. By the time the sun filtered through the blinds, Evelyn was dressed and waiting in the motel lobby with a styrofoam cup of coffee and hands she could no longer keep still. Renee's voice came through sharp and focused. She filed as property management on a home she doesn't own? She doesn't even pay for her own lattes. I'll forward this to our fraud contact at the DA's office. In the meantime, we need to cut off any argument of implied consent. Start with the county. That afternoon, Evelyn called the county clerk. A bored woman with a nasal voice answered. Lease on file? No, ma'am. We've never received any formal rental agreement or tenant contract for that address. Evelyn closed her eyes. Her voice didn't waver. Thank you. Please send that confirmation in writing. Then she wrote a letter, a rescindment of permission to reside. Formal, notarized, emotionless as concrete. She had it served by courier the next day. Eric called within the hour. Mom, he said, tone pitched somewhere between apologetic and exhausted. Can we just talk? Evelyn was seated in her car in the motel parking lot, listening to wind batter the windows. Talk about what? She didn't mean it like this. She was trying to help out. Things got twisted. You watched her change the locks while I buried my sister, Evelyn replied, her voice level. You never called. You never checked in. You watched. It wasn't like that. It was polite when it was verbal, she cut in. Now it's legal, and that's not something I'm unwinding for your convenience. He was quiet for a long beat, then, in a tone more wounded than angry, You're making it permanent? I'm making it protective. She hung up. The next morning, Evelyn drove to the bank and began paperwork to convert her property into a family irrevocable trust. Tessa's name was nowhere near it. Not on the deed, not in the trust, not even as a footnote. Only Evelyn and Michael. That was the home's bloodline. That night, back in her motel room, she checked social media again. Habit or compulsion, she wasn't sure. Tessa had posted a photo. Evelyn's kitchen, her granite counters, her reclaimed oak stools. A burning sage stick sat in the background. The caption read, Fresh energy. Old chapters gone. Tessa posts a photo in Evelyn's kitchen, captioned, Fresh energy, old chapters gone. She posted it like a win. I filed it like a verdict. Evelyn stared at the Instagram photo, her own countertops now the backdrop for someone else's fresh start. Her lemons in that bowl, her wedding gift mortar and pestle, now accessories in a stranger's narrative. She clicked Save Image, then printed it on high-resolution photo paper in the hotel business center, the ink still tacky when she slid it into a manila folder. That picture wasn't aesthetic. It was evidence. Renee barely blinked when Evelyn handed it to her across the conference table. She tagged the location, Evelyn said quietly. Didn't even try to hide it. Renee scanned the image, nodded once, and slid it into a legal sleeve. This'll work. We'll issue the notice to vacate under sole ownership authority. Since she's not a leaseholder and you've revoked permission to reside, this is enforceable. I don't want drama, Evelyn said. Renee raised an eyebrow. You're not making drama. You're ending it legally. Later that day, Evelyn parked 3 houses down from her own. She waited in the car until the black Lexus she didn't recognize pulled out of her driveway and turned down the road. Probably one of Tessa's yoga friends, soft-spoken with steel jaws. Evelyn walked up the path in a sun hat and oversized sunglasses like a woman heading to her garden club. She approached the front window without hesitation, peeled the adhesive off the clear-backed notice, and pressed it to the glass. Notice to vacate, filed by Evelyn Langford. Effective. Immediately, it sat there clean and righteous, centered perfectly at eye level. She didn't knock. She didn't hesitate. She just walked away. Her phone rang before she was even back in the car. Eric. She let it go to voicemail. The second time, she answered. You posted a legal eviction notice? What the hell is this? He snapped. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. It's clarity. You're making this hostile. You know Tessa's under a lot of stress. She's trying to build something. She can build wherever she wants, Evelyn interrupted, but not on top of me. A pause, then icier. She was trying to improve the house? You should have said something if you didn't like it. I did say something, Eric. Every time she removed a piece of me from that home, I said it with my silence. I said it with my grief. You just didn't listen because it didn't cost you anything. There was nothing on the other end of the line but breathing. I've been erased too many times to stay quiet, she added, and hung up. That night, Evelyn sat on her motel bed with a yellow legal pad, systematically writing down every shared password and household account. She called the electric company first. Yes, she told the agent, her voice clear. Remove all secondary access. Change the passcode. No, I do not wish to authorize a new user. Next, the gas company, then the home Wi-Fi, the grocery delivery app, streaming services, even the smart thermostat. By the time she was done, Evelyn had reclaimed her entire domestic ecosystem, but something still itched at the back of her mind. A feeling she couldn't scrub out with legal filings and lockboxes, the credit card. She hadn't used it since before the funeral. But she'd left it active for auto payments, safe, forgotten, until now. The next morning, she called a forensic accountant. Renee had recommended one discreet, efficient, and deeply nosy. I just want to be sure nothing slipped past me, Evelyn told her over the phone. I was distracted, and someone was counting on that. 2 days later, her phone rang. It was the accountant, voice clipped but urgent. You're going to want to see what your credit card was used for. The accountant calls back. You're going to want to see what your credit card was used for. They emptied my closet, then they used my card to furnish it. The email arrived at 7:42 a.m. Evelyn was stirring powdered creamer into burnt motel coffee when the subject line popped up, preliminary findings, urgent. She clicked it open with the same instinct you use to open a wound, knowing it would hurt, but needing to see how deep. Evelyn, the activity on your dormant AMEX confirms more than just casual misuse. Attached is a breakdown of charges, dates, and IP locations, all logged post-Michael's death. Prepare yourself. Kimberly, CPA. She opened the spreadsheet. The first charge was small, a scented candle from an overpriced boutique Evelyn had never stepped foot in. Then came a series of streaming subscriptions, new ones with usernames like House Langford and Energy Renewed. The list ballooned quickly. $238, custom shelving unit, ordered from a reclaimed wood studio in Oregon. $1,947.88. Home spa system installation, $69 per month. Leadership for Women, virtual coaching subscription, $512. Salon package under Langford Household Wellness Fund, $4,021.44. Furniture from a Scandinavian design store Evelyn couldn't pronounce. The most recent charge made her drop the mug. Coffee splashed across the motel's floral comforter, $9,308.10. Interior design retainer, billed under Tessa Langford, property manager. Evelyn stood frozen, hands at her sides, breathing shallow and deliberate. That money hadn't just bought throw pillows and crystal bowls, it had bought erasure. She could picture it now, Tessa, legs crossed, sipping green tea while approving swatches, calling herself owner-adjacent. She printed the full report page by brutal page. The ink smeared faintly from her fingertips. That afternoon, she walked into her bank in pressed slacks and a blouse that still smelled faintly of funeral lilies. The teller glanced up, then recognized her with a polite, tight-lipped smile. "I'd like to file a fraud report," Evelyn said, "and speak to your branch manager. It involves elder financial exploitation." The words left her mouth clean, like polished glass. No tremble, no stumble, just sharp, cold truth. An hour later, the bank flagged the account, froze the card, and initiated a formal inquiry. The manager leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, would you like to file a criminal complaint?" "I already have an attorney," Evelyn replied. "I'll speak to her first." Back in Renee's office, the air smelled faintly of toner and peppermint tea. Evelyn placed the documents on the desk between them, sliding them forward like she was laying down her final poker hand. Renee didn't need long. "This qualifies," she said. "She didn't just use your card. She represented herself as having fiscal authority. It's criminal. Pressing charges isn't vindictive, it's protective." Evelyn didn't blink. "Do it." There was no announcement, no grand declaration. Evelyn didn't call Eric. She didn't post anything. She simply did what Tessa never saw coming, followed the law to its logical conclusion. That evening, Evelyn walked into the quiet of her safety deposit vault. The air inside smelled like steel and old paper. She placed the Langford property deed inside, then added one yellow post-it note pressed flat against the folder. "This house is legally heavier than it looks." On her way out, she caught her reflection in the polished elevator door, still grieving, still tired, but no longer unsure. 3 days later, she received a call while unpacking groceries in her temporary apartment. "Ms. Langford?" said the voice on the line. "We're confirming service. The individual has been formally notified of the criminal complaint, unauthorized use of a financial instrument." Evelyn held the phone between her shoulder and cheek as she pulled eggs from the brown paper bag. "Thank you," she said simply. "Please send me a time-stamped copy." As she hung up, the silence in the room changed. It wasn't peace, not quite, but it was structure, and it belonged to her. "Tessa is served, criminal charge, unauthorized use of financial instrument. They wanted me out. I made the structure carry my name in bold." The ink had barely dried on the criminal complaint when Evelyn filed for a property reassessment. Not just a formality, this was an assertion, a declaration in municipal language that the home on Bent Willow Lane was owned by Evelyn M. Langford, with no tenants, no mana, and no ambiguities. The clerk at City Hall was young, distracted, and barely looked up as he took her paperwork. But the moment he entered the parcel number into the system, his brows pulled together like window shades. "Huh." Evelyn adjusted her purse strap. "Something wrong?" "There's a permit request attached to this address. Remodeling. Pretty major." She tilted her head. "Filed under whose name?" He clicked twice, then frowned. "Tessa Langford, property co-authority and resident manager." "That's inaccurate," Evelyn said crisply. "I'm the owner. She is neither of those things." The clerk paused. "Well, the request was flagged by the assessor's office for mismatched documentation. You might get a call." "You'll be getting one back if I don't?" 2 days later, a voicemail arrived from the city assessor, his tone apologetic but firm. There were discrepancies in the submitted forms. "We'll be issuing a temporary suspension on the permit until this is reviewed." Evelyn used that window to file a formal stop work order, a bright orange notice that would legally freeze any renovation work, effective immediately. She had it posted on the front door, the same spot where her notice to vacate had lived. Another layer of truth nailed to the frame. And then the questions began. The Callahans next door, who'd politely waved but never asked too much, stopped Evelyn on the sidewalk. "We thought you moved out. Tessa said the house was changing hands." "Not legally," Evelyn replied, locking eyes with the husband. "But she was trying." Mrs. Baez across the street nodded slowly. "We noticed the construction trucks. Strange hours. Like they were rushing something." "Not anymore," Evelyn said. "It stopped." The next morning, Evelyn stood at the threshold of her home flanked by 2 uniformed officers, both of whom had reviewed the documents she brought with her. Ownership, trust reassignment, legal notices. No warrant necessary, just validation. The front door creaked open. Inside, the air was sharp with citrus cleaner and artificial lavender. The furniture was modern, minimal, soulless. Her paintings had been boxed, her dining room chairs were gone. Her kitchen felt like a showroom, not a memory. The officers didn't say much, just nodded when she said she'd be changing the locks again. The locksmith she'd hired, a gray-bearded man with forearms like tree trunks, worked quickly. Clicks and clanks echoed down the hall, replacing Tessa's feng shui with real security. As Evelyn walked through the house, the silence throbbed with ghosts of her own restraint. Michael's favorite armchair was missing. Her sister's Afghan was nowhere in sight. But the walls were still hers. She ran her fingers along the hallway, feeling the texture of the paint she'd chosen 20 years ago. Her steps echoed through the now empty master bedroom. It didn't feel hollow, it felt reclaimed, clean, defensive. She poured herself a glass of tap water and sat at the bare kitchen island. No wine. Not yet. There was still one more surprise. A soft knock at the door. Evelyn stood slowly, heart steady but curious. She pulled open the door to find Eric, alone. No suitcase, no smile. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched and unclenched. "Mom," he said. She didn't answer. She waited. Eric appears on the front porch, alone. He knocked like a son, but he asked like a stranger. Eric stood on the front porch like a boy who didn't know which pocket held the truth. His hands were buried deep in the sides of his jacket, shoulders slumped, face weathered, not with age, but with avoidance. His eyes searched Evelyn's, and she saw what he wasn't saying before he opened his mouth. She didn't move from the threshold. "Can we talk?" he asked. His voice cracked slightly, not from emotion, more like lack of sleep, maybe guilt pressed into the folds of his vocal cords. Evelyn didn't invite him in. Instead, she leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, arms crossed tightly. "You can talk. I'm listening." He glanced over his shoulder as if Tessa might emerge from the shadows. When no one appeared, he looked back at her. She didn't mean for it to go this far. The locks, the money, the permits, it just spiraled. She panicked. We both did. Evelyn blinked slowly. "You're really calling it a spiral?" "She was trying to build something. She thought wrong," Evelyn cut in. "She changed the locks while I was at my sister's funeral. That wasn't panic, that was planning." Eric flinched. "I didn't know she'd—" "You did," Evelyn said quietly. "She bragged about it, posted it. And you watched." The air between them hung like a tightrope. Eric shifted his weight. "I didn't know how to stop her. Things moved so fast." Evelyn stepped forward 1 inch, not enough to invite him in, but enough to make him freeze. "You weren't helpless," she said calmly. "You were compliant." He swallowed, lips pressed into a thin line. "I kept waiting for you to call," she said, voice steady. "Just once. To ask if I made it home, to check if I had a roof. But silence became your signature." Eric's eyes welled. He didn't cry, but something inside him collapsed. "I miss you," he said. "This doesn't feel right." "No," Evelyn said. "It isn't right. But it's real." A breeze rustled the trees lining Bent Willow Lane. The house creaked softly behind her, as if exhaling. Eric looked down at his feet. "So, what now?" Evelyn looked past him for a long beat, then back. "Now you leave this porch the same way I left it, with a door closed." He nodded once, not defiantly, just accepting. Then he walked away, slow and heavy. She watched him reach the edge of the driveway, hesitating before climbing into his car. He didn't look back. Inside, the silence of the house had changed again. Not hollow, not angry, just clean. That night, Evelyn sat at her desk and opened the Langford Trust document. She pulled out the section marked Disposition of Assets and drew a single line through the words, Primary Beneficiary: Eric Langford. Below it, in black ink, she wrote, Conditional Beneficiary pending measurable atonement. Then she added a new clause, in legal phrasing but carved from bone. No inheritance shall be granted to any individual who enables, participates in, or remains silent during the forced removal of the trust owner during an active period of grief. She didn't cry. She didn't pause. She simply folded the document and placed it back into the lockbox. Later that evening, as she prepared tea in the kitchen, her kitchen again, her phone buzzed. Alert. Case update. Langford v. Langford, Tessa. She tapped the link. Status. Arraignment scheduled. Public record. There was a date, a courtroom number, and beneath that, her name, not as a defendant, not as a guest, as plaintiff. She poured her tea and sat in her rightful seat at the kitchen table. She took one sip, then another. Across the room, the sunlight glinted off the lock she'd replaced, and for the first time in weeks, the house didn't just feel heavier, it felt grounded. Tessa's arraignment is scheduled. Public record. They wanted me invisible. Now, her charges are anything but. The headline took up half the front page in bold serif letters. Daughter-in-law charged with exploiting elder homeowner in landmark case. Evelyn sat at her breakfast table, steam curling from her mug of Earl Grey, the newspaper spread wide before her like a courtroom exhibit. A grainy photo of the house filled the space below the headline, Her House. Her name was in the first paragraph, written with the same clinical precision she'd grown used to in legal documents. She didn't flinch. Beneath the fold was a quote from a neighbor. "She was always so kind. We had no idea what she was going through." A second quote from someone unnamed read, "I heard the daughter-in-law tried to evict her while she was at a funeral. Can you believe that?" The court filing was public. The indictment, public. The mugshot, real. By noon, the first casserole arrived. It came in a teal ceramic dish with foil across the top and a card that read, "We missed you at Sunday service." Evelyn didn't recognize the handwriting, but she placed the dish carefully in her fridge. Then came the knock on the door, gentle, hesitant. When she opened it, she found Carla Maples from choir practice 3 years ago, holding a Tupperware container and wearing a nervous smile. "We thought you'd moved," Carla said. "Tessa told the group you were downsizing." Evelyn smiled, dry and quiet. "I didn't leave. I was removed." Carla blinked, nodded, and offered the container with both hands. "We're glad you're back. We missed you." More visits followed, all short, none overbearing. People arrived with banana bread, potato soup, and garden-grown tomatoes. Most didn't stay long. A few cried. All of them brought something Evelyn hadn't expected, witness. By the third day, she stopped setting the table for one. She let the food pile up in her fridge like offerings, small tokens that said, "We see you now." Later that week, Renee called and advised restraint. "The press is circling," she warned. "Some legal blogs picked it up after the charges hit court record. I'm expecting a few requests for comment." "Let them write," Evelyn replied. "I'd recommend media silence on your part. You've won this round without speaking." "I won't speak to the press." Renee paused. "But?" Evelyn walked to her study, opened her desk drawer, and pulled out a blank page. "I'm going to write something, not to be published. Not yet." Renee exhaled on the other end. "You always did play a longer game." Evelyn hung up and sat down with a pen. The light in the room slanted golden across the wood grain of the desk. She wrote slowly, carefully, her cursive sharp and steady. Title: For When They Say I Was Bitter. She wrote for 40 minutes straight. Not a memoir, not a confession. Just facts, wrapped in feeling. She ended it with, "Bitterness is a reaction. I made decisions." She folded the paper into thirds and slipped it into an envelope. Then she locked it in her desk drawer, just beneath Michael's old cufflinks. That night, the wind was picking up outside. Autumn brushing against the windows, whispering of endings and new lines drawn in colder air. The next morning, Evelyn went out to check the mailbox. A single manila envelope sat inside, no return address. She brought it inside and opened it carefully, slicing it open with the edge of a butter knife. Inside was a formal notice from a law firm in Tessa's name. Cause, civil claim, emotional distress, filed against Evelyn M. Langford. She let out a quiet laugh, no amusement in it, just disbelief. "She pressed the lock," Evelyn whispered, "and now she's wounded by the door." Evelyn's mailbox receives a notice. Tessa is suing for emotional distress. "She claimed I traumatized her. My trauma came with evidence." Evelyn sat in the stillness of her study, the only sound in the room the slow ticking of the mantel clock, one of the few things that had survived the silent purge of her home. The manila envelope lay open on her desk, its contents spread like a dissection. Tessa's civil claim was as audacious as it was precise, accusing Evelyn of intentional emotional harm and public defamation. The wording was so clean it felt rehearsed, like a performance waiting for applause. She didn't feel rage, not yet, just something heavier, a pressure behind the eyes, the kind that builds not from shock, but from insult, layered on top of injury. This wasn't just arrogance, it was inversion. Tessa was trying to rewrite the narrative one courtroom at a time. Evelyn reached for her phone and called Renee. No pleasantries, no small talk. "She's suing me for emotional distress," she said, her voice low but even. There was a pause on the other end before Renee responded. "Then we counter, and we do it thoroughly." Within hours, they were at Evelyn's dining room table, a battlefield now made of folders, receipts, and time-stamped evidence. Renee worked like a surgeon, gloved in efficiency, scalpel sharp in focus. She divided documents into piles: unauthorized purchases, property permit filings, messages from contractors addressed to Tessa Langford, manager, even screenshots from Instagram posts that boasted about remodeling her home. But the proof wasn't only digital. Evelyn produced something quieter, more intimate: a hospital report dated 3 days after her sister's funeral. It showed abnormal cardiac activity, a stress-induced arrhythmia that had brought her to urgent care one bleak, sleepless night. She hadn't told anyone, not even Eric. She had sat in that cold exam room alone, clutching her chest while trying to explain to a nurse why grief felt like drowning and betrayal, like weight pressing on the lungs. She handed it to Renee without a word. The attorney's eyes scanned the page before she nodded, slowly. "We'll lead with this." There was also video, taken from the doorbell camera, still intact after all the digital locks had been changed. It showed Evelyn returning from the airport in funeral clothes, dragging her suitcase to the front door. She paused when the key didn't work, tried again. The footage caught her face. First confusion, then realization, then silence. No dramatics, no shouting, just a still woman in front of a locked house, her breath visible in the cold, dusk air. The court date was set within the week. Tessa arrived in pressed linen and pearl earrings, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they'd been trained not to blink. Evelyn came alone, her only armor the truth and a folder she carried like scripture. Eric was notably absent. No call, no explanation. His silence now felt less like neutrality and more like cowardice pressed into a polite shape. When the judge, a woman in her 60s with tired eyes and a firm mouth, asked for opening remarks, Evelyn shook her head. "I'd like to proceed with documentation," she said. No speech. They started with the hospital report, moved through the bank statements, stopped at the tax filings where Tessa had listed herself as a household property manager. When the video played, there wasn't a single movement in the courtroom. Even Tessa's attorneys looked away from the screen. The judge said nothing at first, just tapped her pen against the desk slowly, precisely. When the footage ended, she leaned forward. "The plaintiff claims emotional trauma due to reputational harm," she said, "but what I see is someone attempting to capitalize on her own misconduct. Ms. Langford, your claim is dismissed." Tessa's face remained still, but the tight line of her jaw trembled slightly. Then came the counterclaim decision: restitution for emotional distress, reimbursement for all legal costs, full recovery of the unauthorized charges, additional penalty for fraudulent filings. Total awarded $43,722.18. Evelyn didn't blink. She didn't smile. She simply turned, signed the order, and walked out without waiting to hear another word. Later that evening, she refreshed her online banking portal. The pending deposit glowed quietly on the screen. Her balance had grown, but what settled deeper than money was something no lawsuit could shake. Her voice, her name, her memory, restored in full. Judge awards restitution plus court costs. Evelyn's balance grows. She tried to empty the home. I turned it into a portfolio. The wire transfer posted on a rainy Thursday. The restitution arrived in full. No delays, no excuses. Evelyn watched the numbers flicker to life on her screen with a calm that wasn't quite satisfaction. It was quieter than that, like a room finally swept clean. She didn't touch the money right away. She let it sit for a week, letting the silence around it settle. There were no celebratory purchases, no bottle of champagne. Instead, she walked through the house and listened to the way her own footsteps echoed down the hallway, unobstructed by curated furniture or someone else's playlists. Then, one morning, she opened her sister's old recipe box, warped from time and smoke from a long-extinguished kitchen fire, and tucked inside, beneath a yellowing card for pecan pie, was a folded church bulletin. A small star had been drawn in the corner next to a hand-scribbled note in her sister's familiar slanted print. Too many older women leave with nothing. Even their names get left behind. That afternoon, Evelyn sat with Renee and a financial advisor. She wanted something permanent, not just a donation, but a structure. Within 3 weeks, the Langford Shelter Grant was born. It wasn't large, not yet, but it was targeted. Emergency funds earmarked exclusively for displaced elderly women, women evicted by family, caretakers, or legal manipulation. Women like her, women like her sister might have been, had things turned out a little differently. The first donation check went to a small transitional housing nonprofit on the edge of town. The organization ran out of a converted Victorian home that smelled like cinnamon and Clorox. Evelyn handed over the envelope in person, steady and composed, and requested one thing, that the inaugural grant be made in her sister's name. At the dedication ceremony, sunlight spilled in through high windows. The living room had been transformed into a gathering space, folding chairs aligned in neat rows, the carpet freshly vacuumed. There was no podium, just a circle of women, volunteers, caseworkers, survivors, donors. Evelyn stood among them, wearing the simple navy dress her sister had once said made her look capable and dangerous in the best way. The director, a kind-eyed woman in her 40s, introduced Evelyn not as a benefactor, but as a survivor of domestic legal displacement. The term was clinical, but the room understood. After the small ceremony, as tea was being poured into mismatched mugs and cookies passed hand to hand, a woman in a lavender sweater approached her. She was maybe 65, wiry and alert, with the guarded posture of someone used to being overlooked. "I know what it feels like," she said softly, "to come back and find a different lock. To feel like the history you built is now someone else's decoration." Evelyn didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. She smiled, warm and measured. "Not anymore." The woman held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded and returned to the circle. Later, Evelyn noticed a bronze plaque being hung near the staircase. Her name was etched into it, not as a donor, but as a founder. For a moment, it felt strange, almost like vanity. But as she stood there, watching the volunteers step back to admire it, she felt something else take its place. Not pride, not legacy, proof. Her name, fixed in metal, was now tied to something that couldn't be erased from a hallway wall or overwritten with paint. That evening, she walked through her house and noticed how empty no longer meant hollow. The guest room had been cleared and staged. Her plan was to rent it out to traveling nurses through a vetted registry. Purpose had begun to live in corners where grief once lingered. She was in the middle of drafting the announcement for the grant's online press release when the email arrived. Subject, "Just to talk." Sender, Eric Langford. The message was short. "I know I've earned nothing, but I'd like to come by. Just to talk, that's all." She receives an email. Eric wants to visit, just to talk. He didn't bring flowers, just guilt. The knock came at 5:12 p.m., soft but certain, like someone trying to sound polite while carrying something heavy. Evelyn had just taken a chicken breast off the skillet, the scent of rosemary and lemon still warm in the air. She turned off the burner, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and walked slowly to the door, not rushing, not hesitating. Through the sidelight glass, she saw Eric. He was dressed plainly, no suit, no tie. A navy hoodie, jeans, sneakers with scuffed soles. His posture sagged, not in defiance, but in fatigue, the kind that doesn't come from work, but from indecision dragging behind you for too long. She opened the door but didn't step aside. Eric offered a half smile, a shadow of the one he used to give when he was 12 and trying to charm his way out of trouble. "Hey," he said. Evelyn didn't respond with a word. She simply arched an eyebrow and waited. "I wanted to see you, if that's okay." He cleared his throat. "Just to talk, nothing else." She opened the door a few inches wider but didn't move from her place. "This is fine," she said. "You can talk from here." He nodded, stepped back slightly and stuffed his hands into his pockets. "I've been following what's been happening. The charges, the restitution, the grant. I saw the story on the shelter's website. You're doing good work." Evelyn folded her arms. You weren't there when it was bad work. His jaw tightened. I know. For a few seconds, only the wind moved, nudging the hanging fern by the window, brushing past the porch railing. I miss you, he said, voice low. Not the house, not the drama. You. But I didn't stop her. And I regret that more than I can say. Evelyn looked at him long and hard. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion. Not from lack of sleep, she thought, but from trying to rewrite a past that had already hardened into fact. You regret it now because the consequences caught up to you, she said. You weren't out of reach. You just chose silence. Eric looked down. A single tear slid down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. She stepped out just slightly, only enough for her shoes to find the welcome mat. Regret is your weight to carry now, not mine. He nodded slowly, then looked up. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just didn't want to disappear without saying it. Evelyn reached behind her and gently closed the door halfway. You disappeared when I needed you most. This, what you're doing now, is the part where I leave you on the porch. There was no anger in her voice, only finality. Eric stepped back, his shoulders dipping with resignation. Okay, he whispered. Okay. She didn't wait for him to walk away. She turned and re-entered her home, locked the door behind her, and stood for a long moment in the silence. Then she walked into her study. The trust document was already open on her desk, a pen resting diagonally across the page like a question waiting for its answer. She lifted the pen, drew a slow, clean line under Eric's name, and amended the clause with care. Inheritance suspended until measurable atonement. Emotional regret is not sufficient currency. She signed and dated it. The paper didn't tremble. That evening, Evelyn plated her meal. Roasted chicken, green beans, a modest helping of mashed potatoes, and sat by the kitchen window. The chair across from her remained empty, and that no longer felt like a wound. It felt like intention. She ate slowly, without distraction, letting the quiet settle like linen napkins over old grief. Just as she stood to rinse her plate, the doorbell rang. Not a knock this time. A single chime. Precise, businesslike. She opened the door to find a delivery courier standing on the step, clipboard in hand, and a thick white envelope tucked under one arm. Certified mail, he said, extending the clipboard. Needs a signature. She signed, took the envelope and closed the door behind her. The return address stopped her cold. Tessa Langford. She slid it open carefully, the paper smooth and cold beneath her fingertips. Inside was a legal letter titled, Offer to settle, out of court. Evelyn receives a certified mail. Offer to settle, out of court. From Tessa. She offered money to silence a memory. I offered memory to rebuild women like me. The envelope smelled faintly of cologne. Faint, citrusy, the kind sprayed from trial-sized bottles found at mall kiosks. Evelyn could smell it even before she unfolded the letter, its expensive linen paper whispering intention, polished, tactical, practiced. The header bore the name of a firm she recognized from Tessa's earlier filings. This wasn't a personal reach-out. It was a lifeboat thrown from a burning PR machine. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter flat in front of her, her glasses perched low on her nose. The first sentence did not apologize. It offered, Ms. Langford, in the interest of avoiding prolonged litigation and unnecessary reputational distress for both parties, our client proposes a one-time financial settlement in exchange for full and final resolution of all pending matters, including confidentiality moving forward. The number was handwritten in ink. It wasn't small, but it wasn't a fortune either, not for someone who'd spent hers trying to reclaim the space her name once filled. There was no mention of wrongdoing. No acknowledgement of harm, just financial anesthesia offered in a silk glove. Evelyn folded the letter in half and slid it into a folder labeled Active Scars. She placed the folder inside a drawer in her study, not to hide it, but to preserve it. 2 days later, she walked into the downtown library's community room with that same letter tucked under her arm. The Langford Shelter Grant had begun hosting monthly elder justice seminars, small gatherings of social workers, local advocates, and women navigating the delicate tension between legal ownership and emotional betrayal. Evelyn stood at the front, dressed in a charcoal gray blazer and soft scarf the color of sea glass. Her presence didn't command the room, it settled it. She didn't introduce herself as a victim. She said, "My name is Evelyn Langford, and this," she held up the letter, "is what apology looks like when it's afraid of courtrooms." A few chuckles. Mostly silence. Attention. She passed around copies of the redacted offer. On each page, she'd circled the words, "to avoid long-term publicity." "That line tells you who they're protecting," she said. "It's not the person they hurt, it's the image they built while doing it." The attendees scribbled notes, some with furious underlining, others too stunned to move their pens. One woman asked, "What did you say in response?" Evelyn looked around the room. "Nothing? Yet?" Later that week, an email pinged into her inbox, this one from a name she hadn't seen since Michael's funeral, retired Superior Court Judge Lana Peterson. The subject line read, "You've become a case study. Would you like to become a voice?" The invitation was to speak at an annual legal ethics event held at a law school an hour away. Evelyn hesitated for a moment. She didn't seek platforms, but there was something about the phrase case study that lit a particular fire in her chest. She accepted. The event was held in a hall with old wooden benches and an echo that magnified every word by an octave. Evelyn stood behind the podium, her hands steady, her notes brief. Her talk was titled, "Inheritance Isn't a Personality." She spoke not of courtrooms, but of kitchens, of invisible erasure, of how control doesn't always arrive with fists. It often comes dressed as hospitality and phrases like temporary and for now. She ended with a single sentence, "You don't forgive what still demands apology." The audience didn't clap right away, but when they did, it was slow, measured, and full. That night, she drove home under a soft drizzle, the windshield wipers ticking like a metronome. She parked, walked up the path, and noticed something unfamiliar resting against her door. A canvas tote bag. Inside, a bundle of old family photos, keys tied together with twine, and a single torn scrap of paper. It read, "Sorry. No name, no date, but she didn't need one." Evelyn finds a bag on her porch. Keys, old photos, and a note. "Sorry." She gave back what she took, but not what she broke. The keys were cold, not just from the late October morning, but from the message they carried, one Evelyn could feel through the twine binding them together like a bundle of rusted apologies. The canvas bag they'd come in was still sitting in the corner of her entryway, untouched except for her gloved hands, which had handled it like evidence rather than sentiment. The keys had weight. Not symbolic weight, metal weight. She knew them instantly by the scuffs on the brass and the chipped enamel on the pink floral keychain she'd once given to Eric's wife as a housewarming gesture. That was before the war had started, before lines were drawn in crown molding and trust documents. The photos tucked beside the keys were old and worn at the edges. Some she hadn't seen in years. Michael with his arms around Evelyn on their 25th anniversary. Eric at age 9. Cross-eyed from too much cake, even one of Tessa in the backyard, barefoot in a sundress, long before manipulation became her second language. The images felt carefully curated, chosen to ache. But the note was what stopped Evelyn. "Sorry." One word. No punctuation, no signature. And yet it shouted louder than any voicemail. She stood in the silence of her living room, turning the note over in her hand, waiting for something. Anger, grief, satisfaction. But none came. Only the slow clarity of a door that was finally, truly shut. She didn't need to know who left the bag, whether it had been Eric, quietly trying to inch toward redemption, or Tessa, forced into surrender by consequences she could no longer outmaneuver. It didn't matter. The act didn't erase the months she'd slept in a motel, the courtrooms, the locks changed without consent. It didn't erase the silence she was left in while others narrated her absence like it was voluntary. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't clutch the photos. She didn't run her fingers over the keys like relics. Instead, she retrieved a small storage box from her closet. the one she used for documents too personal to shred and too final to frame. She placed the keys and the note inside. On the lid, she affixed a single white label and wrote in black ink, "Returned, not reinstated." Later that afternoon, she sat at her desk and wrote a one-page entry in her journal, the same journal she hadn't opened since the day Eric left her standing on the porch with nothing but his guilt and a driveway full of silence. Forgiveness isn't keys, it's time. And mine is mine again. She signed it with the day's date, then she closed the journal and never reopened it. A few days later, Evelyn met with Carmen, her estate planner, a precise woman who believed that words were contracts and loopholes were weapons. Evelyn handed her a new amendment request, permanent legal reinforcement of her trust terms. No former occupants may re-enter the property without written and notarized consent, no verbal exceptions, no emergency access clauses, nothing open-ended. Carmen reviewed the form and nodded. "You're not just closing a chapter, you're bolting the cover shut." "Exactly," Evelyn replied. With that, the house became hers in every legal and emotional sense. She began the next phase, not with a renovation, but with intention. She cleaned out the guest room, once repainted in calming sage green by Tessa during her mindful living phase, and converted it into a short-term rental for traveling nurses. She kept the furniture minimal, the bed soft, the windows open during the day to let in light. The first guest arrived on a Wednesday evening. Her name was Leah. She carried 2 duffel bags and the scent of peppermint hand cream. She was kind, she was quiet, she was grateful for the room, and most importantly, she had no history in the walls. Over the next month, Evelyn met women from 3 different states. Some stayed for days, others for weeks. They left thank you notes, not apologies. They shared laughter over morning coffee, not gaslit narratives about misunderstandings. The house wasn't just full again, it was alive, with presence, not possession. Then, one afternoon, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it, until she saw the voicemail transcript preview. "We're producing a feature on elder housing rights. We'd like to talk with you, on camera." A documentary team contacts her about filming a feature. The house is heavier, with proof, with policy, with peace. The first time the camera crew stepped into Evelyn's home, she watched their expressions carefully, not out of vanity but to see what they noticed. They didn't gasp at the decor. They didn't marvel at the architecture. They looked at how organized it was, how fortified. They whispered about the fire-safe boxes in the hall closet, the labeled binders in the study, the locks on internal doors that didn't use keys but codes. "This house doesn't breathe fear," one of them said, half to herself. "It breathes boundaries." Evelyn didn't reply. She simply walked ahead of them, motioning silently to where they could set up. The documentary was called Locked Out, The Silent Epidemic, a title Evelyn didn't suggest but approved. It wasn't about her, not entirely. It was about women like her, women who weren't thrown out with fists but with forms, with forged signatures, with the slow erasure of comfort disguised as kindness. Filming lasted 3 days. They followed her through the kitchen she'd reclaimed inch by inch, through the hallway where framed copies of her trust and deed now hung like family portraits. They recorded her unlocking a drawer labeled Legal Backbone. They caught her placing a fresh bouquet on the windowsill next to her sister's urn. No words, just the camera lingering long enough for anyone watching to feel the weight. At one point, during a sit-down interview in the sunroom, a young producer asked, "Do you ever miss them?" The question hung there. Not cruel, but young. Unaware of what it meant to grieve not just loss, but betrayal. Evelyn took a slow sip of water. Her voice, when it came, was even. "I miss what they pretended to be." No one spoke for a while after that. The documentary aired 2 weeks later on a Sunday evening. Within 24 hours, Evelyn's email inbox had more unread messages than she'd received in the last 3 years combined. Some came from women who called her brave. Others came from daughters apologizing on behalf of their mothers. A few came from men, quiet, short messages that simply said, "Thank you. My mom went through this. We didn't realize until too late." One message arrived from a woman in Illinois who ran a small locksmith company out of her garage. She'd watched the documentary twice. Her email was titled, "A Gift of Steel." A week later, a package arrived on Evelyn's porch. Inside, a matte black lockbox about the size of a dictionary, engraved in brushed silver with the words, "For what they'll try to take next." Evelyn didn't cry when she opened it. She smiled. She took her final, notarized will, the one updated with every clause, every boundary, every clause of non-entry and condition of legacy, and placed it gently inside. Then she locked the box and slid it onto the top shelf of her closet, behind the cedar-lined blankets and just above the passport drawer. The house didn't feel lighter. It never had, not since Michael died. But it was heavier in all the ways that mattered now, dense with documentation, with memories safeguarded by law, with peace built not from forgetting, but from remembering clearly and choosing anyway. She had already filed the necessary paperwork to keep the Langford Shelter grant funded through her estate. Her guest room now had a wait list of vetted traveling nurses and health aides. She even hosted a potluck once a month, a table full of strangers who, through some version of displacement, understood that a warm kitchen can be sacred. That morning, while preparing tea for herself and the new tenant, a pediatric ICU nurse from Georgia, her phone rang. The name on the screen made her pause. Carmen, estate law. She answered with her usual clipped grace. Yes? Carmen's voice buzzed through the speaker, calm but energized. Evelyn, your case. It's being referenced. There's talk of legislation, real policy change, state level. Evelyn held the phone in one hand and the kettle in the other. The steam curled upward, warm and clear. Go on, she said. Carmen calls. The case has inspired proposed legislation. She said the house felt lighter. Now it's weighted by law, legacy, and lessons. The late afternoon sun spilled across the porch in a quiet gold, warming the wooden steps Evelyn had restained herself just a month earlier. She sat with a blanket draped over her lap, a mug of tea resting on the armrest, and a file folder open across her knees. The house behind her was still, quiet in the way only homes with no unresolved echoes can be. A breeze stirred the edge of the porch swing's cushion, sending it into a gentle sway that creaked in rhythm with the last crickets of autumn. Evelyn didn't move to stop it. She simply sat still, feeling the weight of something settle, not on her shoulders but beneath her feet. Her eyes scanned the letter in her lap, the state seal embossed at the top. The language was dense, but the meaning was clear. House Bill 72, the Langford Clause. A protection for elderly homeowners against unauthorized occupancy, informal eviction, and financial exploitation by cohabitants. It wasn't just a nod, it was law. And her name, quietly, indelibly, had shaped it. She folded the letter and slid it back into its envelope. Then she turned her gaze toward the street, calm and unhurried. There was no sign of Tessa anymore, no Lexus parked like a trophy in her driveway, no posts on social media claiming ownership with pastel backdrops and filtered lighting, no new lawsuits, no apologies. Tessa had vanished like a fog that burned off once you let the sun stay long enough. Eric hadn't disappeared entirely, but his presence had faded to the margin of a polite ghost. He'd sent one holiday card in December, simple white, no photo, just, "Wishing you peace this season, Eric." Evelyn had placed it in a drawer beside expired coupons and old warranty slips. She didn't frame it. She didn't tear it up either. It belonged somewhere in between. The house, though, had never been more alive. The nurses who rotated through her guest room brought fresh energy, soft voices, the smell of peppermint gum and hospital-grade hand lotion. Sometimes they left behind little tokens. A magnet from a roadside diner, a postcard from a city Evelyn had never visited, even a hand-painted rock that read, "Your proof." The kitchen was always clean but lived in, the hallway walls firm with framed copies of the shelter grant, the court ruling, and now, the legislation. What once had been fragile ground was now reinforced with hard-won steel. Evelyn finished her tea and set the mug on the step beside her. Then, without fanfare, she stood and walked back into the house, her steps light, but her presence unshakable. She moved through the foyer, past the bookshelf lined with cookbooks and court binders, and into her study. The lockbox from Illinois still sat on the top shelf of the closet. She pulled it down gently, entered the code, and opened the lid. The final copy of her will lay inside, preserved in acid-free sleeves. Evelyn took out a pen and, with the calm of someone editing a memoir rather than scripting an ending, added one final line to the closing paragraph. "This home stays heavy, because I carried it when no one else did." She paused, reread it once, then placed the document back in the sleeve and sealed the box with a firm click. Outside, the wind was shifting. Autumn was beginning to fold into winter, and the light through the windows was less golden now, more amber, like aged whiskey or sunlit maple. She walked to the front door, opened it slowly, and stepped back out onto the porch. The air was cooler now, but clean. Evelyn looked back at the house one final time before the camera would cut away. If life were film, if moments like these could be directed. Then, with the ease of a woman who no longer feared intrusion, no longer feared silence, no longer feared being forgotten, she closed the door. It clicked into place. No key required. They changed the locks. I changed the law.